There was an organization called Women Get Paid, or Ladies Get Paid, that's what it was called, and they ran seminars for women about finding out about unequal pay practices, negotiating better pay for themselves, just like a skills course. But they only opened the course to women and not to men, and some men sued the organization under civil rights law, saying that was sex discrimination. And they settled. Oh, they were afraid they were going to lose, so they settled the case.
Yeah.
And now they let the men come to the seminar. So I'm just saying that these are. So one solution might be to have a bunch of public policies that actually try to get parity in leadership positions, corporate boards, political party committees, other positions of influence. But because of the way that our law has developed around sex discrimination, it's actually not a foregone conclusion that we'd be able to do that in this country.
I was just going to say that,
Well, we gotta time out now.
Yeah.
So
Alright.
I thank everybody. I mean, okay.
I'm so sorry I was late.
Do you have
Yeah.
one last question? I don't wanna, you know.
I
Is there a
have
question?
I just want to add on to this parity.
CREWTV is a movement. We are civically re-engaged women, and this is the Seneca Falls Revisited virtual experience. It's CREW's Centennial celebration event commemorating 100 years of American women's right to vote. Get your subscription today.
Hi, I'm Gerald Alston of the Manhattans, and on this special day, I'd like to sing this special song and a shout out to Miss Sharon Nelson. I was born by oh, and just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother, and I said, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. And oh, there have been times that I thought I couldn't last for long. But now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. God bless.
The Constitution is a living document. It is not static. As citizens, we need to make it real, not just for some of us, but for all of us. The phrase "with liberty and justice for all" mean all. We're one people. We're one family. We're the American family.
The discovery of an individual's liberty is one of the foundational values of being an American citizen. America has been struggling to define the rights and justices associated with that liberty since the creation of its Constitution. From this struggle evolved the monumental Bill of Rights and 17 more amendments to define whose national sense of liberty, equality, and the inclusion of all citizens evolved with turbulence and struggle.
When we were planning the March on Washington in August of 1963, I would hear Dr. King say things like, "We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools."
Freedom, true freedom, is not given by freedom to their fellow human beings, and I call them human rights, are theirs to give.
The issues that compel America to continue to define equality and fairness, I think it's innate. I really believe that it's in our soul, that we believe in freedom, freedom of the individual. We believe that humans have a right to peacefully coexist with fellow human beings.
So there are two monumental statues on the Pennsylvania Avenue side of the National Archives building. One inscribed, "Study the past," the other, "What is past is prologue." The message is we should be able to learn from our history so that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over. And the role of the National Archives is to ensure that people have access to the records that demonstrate how those rights were achieved so that we can learn from those records.
With over 11,000, 27 of those actually ratified, our pursuit of rights and justice continues to be a vibrant part of our democracy. It's up to every generation of Americans to own our democracy and continue this national dialogue of defining our personal liberties.
It is very, very important for all of us as citizens, for all of us as one people, to take ownership of our system of justice. This is our democracy. It belongs to all of us. We must talk about it. We must debate it. We have to continue to fight every single day. If we do not, we will go backward. We don't want to go backward. We want to go forward and complete our effort to create a more perfect union.
I wonder how you all came to have your individual passions, your passions for individual freedom, and the concerns that we're really here to talk about today.
I'm lucky to have been here for a very long time. I won't say how long, because then you're going to look at me and go, really? But I've been here a long time and came up, started as a very enthusiastic volunteer, actually, and ended up working on individual cases of human rights violations. And then I got to work with President and Mrs. Carter. And I had lived overseas. I'd lived in Zaire, now the Congo, and understood how important it was what President Carter achieved with putting human rights at the front of foreign policy. So I think for today's conversation, I think what I'm feeling the urge to think about, to talk about, is to build on what the conversation was that they had, which was, where are we on our journey for human rights? Because civil rights, as we understand it, is very specific to participation, access to participation in civic life. And we have in recent years been looking at the rights of women, because not only that we have strong women and President Carter and Mrs. Carter feel strongly about it, but this is an area where human beings, half of the planet, are actually not full human beings in the way we live. Even in this country, we never were able to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Women in this country do not enjoy the equal protection of law. And so when we have victims of violence, they are not protected by the law in the same way that men are.
I was able to see how the definition of human sometimes is actually the real root of the problem when you're talking about human rights. Whose rights are we protecting? And in cases, for example, like Thailand, oftentimes the people most often trafficked are young girls from hill tribes. They're not citizens, they don't have any paperwork, so they're not protected by the state and they're not considered human. And I think you could apply that to pretty much every situation, whether it's refugees without paperwork or people living in poverty here in the United States or in Atlanta.
The necessity for any movement to advance, it had to resolve the internal contradictions. And to the extent that those internal contradictions were not resolved, then you would have a continuation of problems such that a particular kind of movement would not succeed in this effort. So let's expand on that and apply it to this national project that we see here in these United States of America. So there has been this discussion, a conversation in a sense, about freedom and human rights. But there needs to be, I think, a conversation about the conversation. All right, that gets to one of our internal contradictions, which is this capacity, and I think it came out in President Carter's comments early on in his interview, where we almost have this juxtaposition of being able to proclaim with pride the values, the exceptionalism that define, again, this American experience, right? And at the same time, refuse to grapple with the contradictions that defy those proclamations that we make about ourselves.
Getting people, one, to step out of their comfort zones, and whether it's taking a tour of different part of town or different neighboring state, let alone if you go overseas, do you really want to take time off the beach to go and visit an orphanage and see what the struggles are and how you can help? Because sometimes it's something as simple as $20 that a girl needs a birth certificate, just the paperwork processed, so that she can enroll in school. And that $20 that you would have spent in 2 or 3 days at Starbucks could go a long way towards allowing someone's whole entire life outlook to be different.
We started because of an injustice for a little girl who was 10 years old. We shared that rhetoric, much like they did in the civil rights era of the 60s, with everyone we could come into contact with in community, on our jobs. And then they rallied with us. And then there were hundreds of us speaking on behalf of that child who was once voiceless. And then we took that voice and we went to legislatures and we said laws must be changed. And there wasn't just 1, 2, 3, 4. There were thousands of us across this state of Georgia. And that moved us to work in concert with people we would normally not work in concert with. We worked in concert with men and Republicans and Democrats and independents and people who didn't think like us but knew that there was an injustice, and together we could do something that would change this state and the dignity of those children who were being bought and sold in our communities. And that materialized on May 5th, 2015, with the governor here signing the historic Safe Harbor Rachel's Law into Act. That's a direct correlation back to the 60s and the civil rights movement. We just took a page book because we didn't have to reinvent that.
I wondered if you all could talk about social media and how this has impacted the work that you do. If it's facilitated it, if there are things in social media that make this work more difficult, what the net balance of it is.
Depending on, again, the concreteness, we have to make those decisions of the proper instruments based on the realities. And I'm not sure if we're having those conversations. Maybe it's our challenges in the kind of intergenerational transfer of technology, intergenerational transfer of movement that we have that conversation. And maybe it's our fault or previous generations' fault for not having this dialogue with our young people and those who proclaim to use social media in the context of movement. Maybe they're just reaching out and grabbing what's there in the absence of that discussion.
Now, if you turn on the news, all you're really going to hear about is social media and see what else is happening in the world and what else is happening in our state that is not being covered because it's not getting as many ratings. And so in the past without, so.
That's right.
FDR mastered the radio and got the public. JFK mastered the TV and got the public. And Donald Trump has mastered social media and is accelerating with using this. It was a really good point, I thought, because I think there's a caution that we can't dismiss it. We can't dismiss its power. We know that ISIS and Daesh and these groups are using it very effectively, so we can't be naive about it. We have to know it, we have to understand it and how to use it. I think we do have to understand, though, that the civil rights movement succeeded because they had a strategy. They had meetings, they had people meeting face to face.
What about this work makes you hopeful? If you're trying to appeal to people, say this is what you should do, what is it you see that gives you that hope that things can change and that the progress can be made?
I see it when we've rescued 13 boys and they said, thank you for rescuing us, even though we're not a girl, that you saw us. I see it when we'll go to the polls this November on November 8th, and we have the opportunity to vote for Senate Resolution 7, the funding mechanism, the constitutional amendment here in Georgia that will for children who have been victims of human sex trafficking. That's hope for me. It's hope for me when my baby girl says, I have a job, Ms. Williams, and no one is tricking me out anymore. We have to have hope in the work that you're doing, and because it's almost like it's the thing that nobody wants to talk about, right? And there are this provide services to people who are trapped in what we can call slavery, right? And there are whole jurisdictions where they have adopted a comprehensive approach. In Sweden, they passed a law 15 years ago that sees people who are trapped in the sex trade, child or adult. That's right.
And says, we know that this would not be a choice that any person would make if they had other options.
And I think the real way in which you can alleviate the pressure for organizations to pop up and save and recuperate and rehabilitate young girls and boys is for there to be other opportunities. And keeping kids in school is a huge piece of that, which is why all of the organizations always emphasize a component on staying in school education, helping girls finish at least K through 12.
Young people in Ferguson and other types of responses to some of the dynamics that we see unfolding in front of our eyes, I think they demonstrated a certain level of courage, which said that we are prepared to proclaim for ourselves that this is our movement and it's our time. And that's what I think gives me hope. Not that young people are moving, because again, to kind of complete the circle, young people are always moving, they're always responding in some kind of way to challenge what they see to be the distasteful or injustices of their time. But what I think I see happening now is that they're prepared to do so with a certain sense of courage, a certain sense of clarity.
Most people think they can't engage in human rights in their everyday lives. How can you guide us to be more involved in our thinking about thinking about and advocating for human rights?
Really think within yourself, what do you care about? Pick something that just really talks to your heart, and really dive in and go in for the long term. You know, try not to just dabble. You know, dabble until you find the thing. But human rights needs us all because it's actually quite in danger.
I have learned that when I save one male, I generally, on average, save 3 to 4 girls, because he will not go to try to profit off of her body.
Right.
When I can put him in school, in a classroom, give him a support system, the mentors that are necessary, counseling if that's required as well, housing, food, and a part-time or full-time job, then he doesn't see it as a necessary evil for him to go and prostitute another girl, or sell another woman.
There's a reason why all the great religions of the world have explicit reference to how one treats strangers. because left to our own devices, we will hit the stranger over the head with the club. But we have to have these parables, and we have to have these surahs, and we have to have these religious edicts that tell us, don't hit the stranger over the head with the club, see the stranger as your brother and your sister. And hopefully after enough socialization to actually we begin to look at the world this way.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be celebrating it
nationally. This is a very, very big deal because, which is to vote. And women have struggled for 72 years to get this right. And it really was remarkable because it's never easy. And I want to highlight and we want to just celebrate the nameless and the faceless because there are millions, gazillions of women who are in the movement that never get any of the credit. You know, of course, we know our iconic women, but it's really, really important that this is a celebration for all of us and that all of us can see ourselves somewhere in here.
to celebrate that right that people sometimes often take for granted is the reason that I wanted to help you and I wanted to be there. And you've got a
So we have a couple of things. First of all, let me give a shout out to our legacy co-chairs. We're going to be welcoming the 3-time great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, the 3-time great-grandniece of Harriet Tubman, the great-granddaughter 3 times over of John Brown, as in John Brown at Harper's Ferry. And we have Manuela Roosevelt, who is the wife of David Roosevelt, who is the grandson of FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt. So
it's really amazing, really. I mean,
it just gives you chills when you think about it.
I am Miwako. I was born in a little town of Oiso near Yokohama. In 1945, after the war had ended, I met an American soldier named Walter Lutz. We fell in love. Two years later, we married and left Japan for the United States. On the day our plane landed in Cleveland, Walter's hometown, I was nervous and worried about meeting his family. Walter's mother was friendly, but I wondered if she was wishing that Walter had married an American girl. The others were nice to me too. I had my first look at Cleveland, Ohio, the city which was to be my new home. Mrs. Ratz had been living alone since Walter's father died, and we were going to stay with her until we could get a home of our own. As I looked around me, I was frightened. In this house, I would have to face a new life, very different from the one we had known in Japan. The next evening, Walter invited his family to come to the house and see the pictures he had taken in Japan. I was still uneasy because I wasn't sure these people liked me. Something unpleasant happened to me that night. Walter's cousin telephoned, and Mrs. Ratz wanted me to introduce myself. English was hard for me then, especially on the telephone. I couldn't understand a word. I knew there was no reason to be upset, but I felt stupid and ashamed.
I took this picture of Miwako on our wedding day. This is Miwako's hometown, where we met. And this is her mother. Miwako took this picture of me near Mount Fuji. One thing that especially intrigued me was bamboo. This is Miwako and I just after we became engaged. And this is a picture of Miwako's family, taken the day we were married. The picture show was almost like introducing Miwako's family to my own. More than anything else, I wanted my mother to accept Miwako and to like her, especially because the two would often be alone together while I was away on business. One thing was sure, the children liked her. I could see Miwako was relaxed and happy. Now she was teaching the kids a Japanese game. The next day, I introduced Miwako to my town. I was a little nervous for her sake because I knew that an American with a Japanese wife would attract attention on the street. We did get a look of real resentment from one woman. She had lost a son at Iwo Jima. Miwako was disturbed, but when I explained, she understood. I knew she was still feeling a little strange, and I thought some new clothes might make her feel better. So we went shopping.
The day came, 2 weeks later, when Walter had to go away on business. As his suitcase snapped shut, I felt already the loneliness of being without him. Walter's mother would be with me, but my poor English made it hard for us to talk. And we did not know each other yet. I became homesick for Japan and my own mother. I remembered our house, the voices of my brothers and sisters. I remembered home. I wondered if Walter, 300 miles away in another city, was as lonely as I was.
When my trip was over and I came home, I could hardly wait to see Miwako. Try to conceal it, I could see that more than anything else, I wanted her to be happy. I would have to have a different job, one that would not take me away from Miwako. But what? These bamboo carvings seem so simple. Maybe we could even make them ourselves. Miwako thought it would be fun to try. Miwako wrote to her brother asking him to send us some raw bamboo. Weekends and evenings, Miwako and I experimented. Little by little, we improved on our first crude attempts. Both became so interested in what we were doing that we lost all track of time and often worked late into the night. Available. A friend of ours owned a small house furnishing store and had offered to try selling the things for us. The objects sold so quickly that we could hardly make them fast enough. Not long after, I was to go on another business trip. I always dreaded these separations as much as Miwako. My mother handed me a letter. It was from my friend who owned the store. And inside was another check for a sizable amount and a request for many more orders. More than Miwako and I could fill, working only evenings and weekends. I never went on that trip. But then and there, I made up my mind to quit my job and go into the bamboo business. I had some savings, and so we decided to open a store.
I was so happy about the store that little by little I was feeling less like a stranger in a foreign country and more at home. And then the telephone rang. I knew the others were busy and I should have answered it myself. But I just couldn't. They'd hung up. I couldn't blame Walter for being annoyed with me, and I was ashamed. I decided to do something about this, so I joined a class at YWCA, where I could improve my English. As time went on, my English improved so much. But I was still afraid of the telephone. Walter understood and always answered for me. I was grateful, and yet, each time the phone rang, I felt that I had failed him. We had both the store. To go on a picnic. We thought a day in a country would do us both good. Business at the store had been slow at first, but now we could look around us with pride in what we had done. We were together, and our future seemed good. Walter needed a doctor, and somehow I had to get one. I had no choice now. At that moment, the telephone became my friend instead of my enemy. When Walter was better, we decided to give a skiaki party. never wondered whether I was liked. I knew I was. The Mrs. Lutz had become a second mother to me. There was something in my mind that night, something I have to tell Walter about. I told him I was going to have a baby. But that was just a beginning. We have 2 of them now, 2 little girls. I wish my mother could see.
Hey guys, it's great to see you, to reconnect in the cybersphere. I want to introduce you first of all because everybody needs to know who we're talking to. And I don't know if the world is seeing you in the same order that I am, but I've got Vivian Lee to begin, left to right, then me, I'm Roma Torrey, Kristen Shaughnessy, and then on the bottom 2, Amanda Farinacci, followed by Janine. You are definitely tops in my sisterhood, and it's always great to join you. When we talk about the theme of sisterhood, let's get to first, we are women, we are sisters deep down, but we're also working individuals. And I want to get a sense from any of you to share what a great day is at the office. As a woman, what has been a wonderful moment for you? What makes a good working situation? By the way, I can start for a second. For me, working in the newsroom has been such a joy. Whenever we're in a live event and we've got all of our they're trained to do, and they're all, for me as an anchor, it's the opportunity to coordinate so many disparate elements. No writing at that point if there's a live event, but taking the visuals and whatever is on social media and being able to put it all together into a coherent report that informs our audience the best way we can to me, it's like a symphony. And that's what makes a great workday. Whether we're talking about women or men, that to me is the ideal work situation.
Well, for me, I anchor, but I also am a reporter, so I'm out in the street a lot. And as a journalist, you're a storyteller. And a great day for me is really giving a voice to those people who don't have one, right? So television is a powerful medium, and those who see themselves on television or get their story or their message across on television, it empowers them. And so a great day for me is to tell that story that really brings out whatever issue it is that sort of, it elevates it. It elevates their story. Don't know how to get their story across. And so to be able to interview them, get their words, put it into a storyline, a 2-minute story, a powerful news piece, and get it out to the world. And now really, we work in New York City, but this story, because of social media, could be seen all over the world. So really the impact could be great when you tell a good story.
Just to piggyback on those, I'm sorry, Roma.
No, go ahead.
You guys sort of nailed it, Roma. You describing the live situation. As a reporter, you want to be the person who is taking the toss from you, who's watching and explaining the situation from the scene as it's unfolding. That's like a lot of work and a lot of stress, but also like a lot of adrenaline and a lot of fun. And I know that sounds silly a little bit, but that's sort of the high that gets you through so many hours and so much stress and so much being so on. And then at the same time, I think that there's a nice balance being the person who gets to tell the story, like Janine mentioned, that has not been told before, right? Where you're going to gut punch impact, where you are giving voice to people who don't have it, where you're raising an issue that hasn't been appropriately or adequately addressed before, and you're the person who found it, who researched it, who sort of like hit it, brought it all the way home. And so it is a different kind of fun, but also like you put the piece out there and then you sort of watch the ripple effect, right? And that's like, for me, where I get my highs, I guess. Yeah. Those are the good days.
Yeah, well, you know what it is? The whole notion of having a voice and being able to use our voice in a unique or powerful way really does make my day. But the other side of the coin, though, is that we talk about the suffragists and all that they managed to accomplish, that they gained a voice when they won the right to vote. But even today, 100 years later, a lot of women don't have a voice, or if they do have a voice, they don't use it to speak up. And so the other side of the coin is, have you guys ever experienced situations where you've been in a work situation and you were scooped, or because you were a woman, you were taken advantage of, or you had to defer to a male presence in the newsroom? Has that ever been your experience? And Vivian, let me start with you. Has that been something that you can share?
You saw me nodding, like
yeah.
It's happened on a couple of occasions in different jobs when I was much younger, and I had found a story. And there was one in particular that I remember. It was a story that another senior reporter had actually touched on, but I was updating it with a new development. So what that ended up happening, to my surprise, was a meeting was called with me, the senior reporter, and the managing editor. And the three of us kind of hammered it out. And I guess I felt the bull rising in me in terms of like a serious anger and some consternation that I was facing this in that day and age. And I pushed back. And I actually turned to the managing editor and said, so when stories are a few years old and somebody who's more senior says, no, that was mine because I touched it several years ago, is that reason enough to have that person continue to cover that story? And I remember the managing editor and I had a great relationship, and he agreed with me. He agreed that I should be able to take it. And I don't think my relationship with that more senior reporter was ever the same again, but that was an example of being big-footed. I think there was a gender-based impulse behind that treatment, and probably my age might have had something to do it. Maybe that senior reporter thought I was too much of a whippersnapper to try and take on a subject that reporter had already touched. So yeah, it's a very disheartening feeling, but it feels great when you stand up for yourself and fight back and prevail.
Yeah. Here, Vivian. Way to go. Yes, and have you had a similar experience?
You know, I can't think of like any specific example like Viv has had, but I think we've all just kind of run into roadblocks in our career where you can kind of feel the weight, where you have to find your voice and stand up. So,
Amanda, I think you once told me you had experienced something similar to that.
A couple of actually it's happened to me a lot of times where I delivered the sort of the original tip that led to the big story. I did the first big story, and then more resources or more help or more support went to a male who was either a political reporter or somebody that they deemed sort of quote unquote more appropriate. There were obviously some gender issues there that should pick up on the continuing coverage of the thing that I first brought to the table. It's infuriatingly frustrating. You've innovated something and you've brought and delivered something unique and amazing. And even if it's not really amazing, you just get that sort of high at knowing that you've done something, that you've brought something exclusive, or you've got a scoop, and then realize that like it doesn't matter. Even though you were the original, it's just going to go to somebody with, someone else that's probably not a woman or me.
All right, I'm going to describe a behavioral trait and tell me if this resonates at all with any of you. That women tend to be self-defeating, that they second guess themselves. They don't think maybe they measure up to some of their other colleagues, particularly male colleagues. And they often apologize for not being better. Is that something that any of you can relate to? Kristen, I see you smiling.
yeah, I mean, I think I had a really bad habit of saying sorry to the point where I recognized it, and I try not to do that anymore because I wasn't apologizing really. It was just sort of, that's a female thing to do. I think for a lot of women, maybe not for you guys, but so knew my voice, but you're also supposed to be polite and you're supposed to have a certain temperament. You can still be.
It seems like men, they say what they need to say because they feel like they have the authority to say it, and women, when they second guess, should I be saying this? Should I weigh in? Should I just step back? Because you don't want to be deemed as, oh, she's such a bitch. She comes in there and she just, is trying to take over. And, it's just the whole other thing. It's being assertive versus being, like a bitch. Like you just don't want to be in that category.
Yeah. So it's different labels, don't you think, Janine? In terms of, a woman is described one way, and a man would be described as powerful. It's just, you're going to get if you do the same thing, you're going to get a different label if you're a female.
Right.
Yeah.
On this particular, but a woman's a diva, right? Like,
right.
Same idea.
One time I did a story, and it was written up, the press wrote up the story of Hurricane Sandy coverage, and I was described as chatty. Chatty. Would a man ever be described as chatty because I talked a lot during my live shots? Never.
They would be described as informative.
Right.
Yeah.
Authoritative. Yeah.
Well, and also
authoritative.
Men, when men are forced, when women are forceful, you said it, they're overly assertive, they're bitchy, and I wish we could change that perception in our own work situations, but also from the public, because I sometimes, and unfortunately through social media, people are just just chime in anonymously and say, you know, the most insulting things to me. But oftentimes they resent if I say anything that has, well, I hate to use a strong opinion. I don't render opinions, but for example, if they're lying or whatever, they jump down my throat. When a guy does it, they go, here, he's being tough. He's a great interviewer, you know?
Right.
So
I think a lot of it starts with recognizing first how we all were raised and what generation we were raised by, and from what generation we belong to. Because I catch myself telling my daughters, keep your voices down. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I've only in the last couple of years realized how much I heard that as a young girl. And I don't want to pass on to my daughters that they should not voice an opinion, not stand up for themselves, but volume has a lot to do with how you're conditioned, like the level of volume that is considered appropriate for both boys and girls at this age. And I catch myself doing that. So now what I try to do is counter that by saying, okay, we are not in a place where we can use our outdoor voices. If you have something to say, ask for my attention first. Just say, please, Mom, can I say something? And I try to couch it in a different way because that is definitely not something that I grew up with. And when I entered news, I kind of felt like this is a business where everybody's opinion helps to make the final product, and everybody's opinion will be valued and cherished, whether you say it privately, like in a story meeting, or publicly as an anchor or reporter. That is not the case. Even our own business is deeply affected by these generalizations that I think we all become socialized with.
Mm.
You know, 100 years later, we're still dealing with it, right?
No, we are. And, you know, I can extend that socialization to, I think we end up giving the perception that we're undeserving of perhaps the money that we get or the accolades or whatever. And it goes back to that whole, we apologize too much. But I think oftentimes we feel that maybe we don't deserve the salaries that our male colleagues get. And I'm just wondering, have any of you experienced that where you didn't fight for a comparable salary that you really did deserve, but you just felt like, well, who am I? I don't think I'm worth that much money, for example. Have you ever had that experience?
I actually did fight, and I asked for a lot more than I was making, just to let them know I knew what my worth was. I had also found out what the guys were making who had less years ago, probably 20 years ago, maybe 19 years ago. And it was helpful because, you know, we started knowing what people were making, what we were making, and it really helps you negotiate. And I will tell you what my brother-in-law, who owns a company, said, I've never had a woman come to me and ask me for a raise. Never.
Really?
25 years, 30 years.
The men do, right?
Men always do. Yep.
Yeah.
And the women don't want to be seen as demanding, right? Oh, she's so demanding. But when men go in there being demanding, the same thing. It's like, that's okay. But for a woman, it's like, you know, who does she think she is coming in here demanding A, B, and C? So yeah, it's the perception of when a woman asks for something versus what a man asks for something.
Yeah, I actually went into a contract negotiation a long time ago saying, I don't want to be greedy, you know, and
then they have you right there.
Total undermining of your worth, right?
Because it's not about greed.
Right.
It's about putting your worth based on your experience, where you've worked, what you've done, what you've achieved. That's not greed. I don't think a man would be accused of being greedy if he listed all of his accomplishments and where he managed to get them done.
Yeah.
It is the one area that can be an equalizer with an employer. If female colleagues or all colleagues share their salary, that makes you more powerful as a group.
Yeah.
And I think that you need that. Go ahead, Amanda.
When I was in high school, I worked at the Gap, and I worked with like 7 other friends. We all worked at the Gap. We all made like $12.50 an hour. We were all like very open about the fact that we made $12.50 an hour and, you know, whatever. And then once you sort of get to the real world, people just stop, as women, just stop discussing it. And so you can enter into this sort of very lonely realm of, you feel happy that you have a job, especially we work in news in New York City, the #1 market. You feel grateful that you've made it. Like me, I started out here, so I wasn't coming in from someplace else. So I was just like, oh, wow, I'm here. I'm going to take whatever they offer. But I had literally years of ignorance and not wanting to rock the boat and not wanting to be demanding or oversell myself or price myself out. Meanwhile, I know there are males who have either less experience or as much experience, who are making significantly more money than I am. And I have accolades. I have worked for 20 years but it's all because we are preconditioned almost since we're from college, the age to just sort of like, I've had the same best friends my entire life. We don't even talk about money. And that's just, we did before we were younger, but once you get older and things start to get more real, it just becomes an uncomfortable conversation. And that's really something that needs to change, because like the information is power. Like I say to younger women now, like, guys, talk to each other and tell each other, because like, if you don't know what everyone else is doing, that's by design. That's meant to keep you at 80 cents or whatever on the dollar, right? I think it's the figure. That's purposeful.
It's that, yeah, it might be 77.
It's already happening. There are people in their 20s who have told me, the new thing now is to tell each other what we're making, especially if we're all going for the same kind of job. And it's kind of smart, because then it completely neutralizes competitiveness and almost puts to
because they're not sharing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I credit Janine for that, because I think you came to me, Janine, and I was like, you have to make a decision. Do you trust each other enough to do it? We didn't know we were friends, but we didn't know each other that well. We had both sort of started it. We weren't, and it was a really good, smart move on your part.
Well, I think a lot of times women have to bond together, and information is power, and you empower each other so that when you go in there for your negotiation, you kind of know what your next move is. Like, what am I? I'm going to go in there and ask for this level because I know, A, B, and C are making that, and I am in that category, and I should be at that level. And so to have that information, especially as a woman, because most of the time, the people that you're asking for a raise or a contract negotiation, they're men. And so the men are not, you're already like at a disadvantage as a woman. With men looking at, she's going to be demanding, and she's going to try to sell herself, and I'm more powerful than she is. So you're already going in there in a vulnerable position. And so to have information.
Never be upset about if someone is making more than you shouldn't be upset about that, because that means you can make that too. That gives you a goal to reach for, and it only helps all women. And that should be the goal, to help all women, everybody really, not just women and men, but for women particularly, when it comes to pay, the more somebody makes, you should be happy for them.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the competitive culture of the workplace. And, maybe that's a generational thing, because I think young people are getting it now. They realize that there is power in sharing information. But for us, I have to be honest, I didn't want to reveal my salary, because I was afraid if that came out, then other people would want that salary. And then instead of raising others, I'd be lowered, as if there is a finite amount of money to be given out, and that we all have to share it, equally.
Right.
Guys never think of it that way, and that's part of the problem. And I think, we really do have to open up to one another and, make it, and share that kind of information. That's really strong. The whole notion, though, of women in a workplace being supportive has always bothered me too, because a lot of times people will ask me, we have this lawsuit, and they say, well, is your management male or female or whatever? And, granted, there are issues with male bosses, but women bosses can be equally unsupportive. And that has always struck me as so strange, that women work against one another oftentimes. And, we've had our share of some female bosses who've been actually worse than some of the male bosses. And they have judged us on our appearance. And, that's another area that, I think would be worthwhile to get into. The fact that we're in a business where we are judged based on cosmetics, hair, information, informing people. And so suddenly, and maybe this is the foxification, well, I guess it's been building for a long time. Women are expected to be young and very pretty. The whole, the beauty queen syndrome. It's so frustrating to me as a woman that I have to look a certain way. I have to dye my hair. I can't go gray. There is pressure to Botox. By the way, I've not done it. Maybe I should say yet, but I really resist that whole cosmetic treatment there, surgical treatment. But what do you guys think about that? I mean, how frustrating is it to you that you have to go through all these machinations to look a certain way in order to be accepted on the job? Anybody?
I agree with you. I think the problem starts with the number of international, transnational media companies that are governed and led by men. I think there was a study put out some time ago that showed around the world there was like an appalling lack of female representation at almost every senior level of management in all the major media companies in America, and a few that were identified in Europe. There's that, as well as obsession with the idea that youth equals beauty, number one. And so what you need to do as a woman especially is preserve your youth as much as possible in order to at least start to fill in the equation that makes up and results in beauty. I think we are in a very optics heavy business. I think looking professional, looking like we take care of ourselves is a dominant kind of predisposition that I think every man and woman is subjected to when they enter any kind of business that puts them in the spotlight. However, there is much more leeway given to men to age, and that idea that they become more valuable as they age, the graying at the temples and maybe some more wrinkles on the face connote wisdom, experience,
gravitas,
but not the same to women.
Right.
And I think changing that, I know we had all had this discussion before, all of us, with, I think I had asked you all, when did you realize that you had to start taking extra measures to preserve this idea of youth? And you all came up with your own examples of it. And it was really kind of just like really upsetting to know that this was a shared experience among women. And our business is in a lot of ways perpetuating it. There was that anchor in Australia, it was like the Today Show in Australia, where he wore the same outfit, the same jacket. And just
in a couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, and that went viral, and it touched off so many conversations in media newsrooms and media pens when people were working out in the field, where it was so apparent that it was true. The man was not bothered for having worn the same blazer every day. And he himself even called out his industry for having a different standard set for women.
Mm.
And if a woman wore the same color 2 days in a row, it would be like an epiphany.
Right. A woman has to have season-specific colors and textures.
You were green yesterday. What are you doing?
And yes, you know what? I have subscribed to the pressure. I have a rotating wardrobe account. I have not canceled it in this age of COVID. I've kept it. I'm only human, but I am aware that I'm under this pressure. I'm happy to discuss it out in the open, because I think at least having that discussion about that double standard needs to start.
I agree. This with a discussion. What happens when you use your voice to speak up and defend your rights going to be retaliated against. I obviously, we did speak up, and we have experienced retaliation, but what advice do you guys have, or what can you impart to other women who maybe don't want to go the route, obviously, of that extreme of filing a lawsuit, but how would you advise women who feel that victimized in some way in the workplace and don't want their
department and resource for the company. Their investigation now and kind of see if there's other people with, but or to somebody with is not a good idea.
And I would say just do it strongly enough about the wrong that's been, done to you, then of beliefs or and you feel like we all have daughters, and we think about what comes in the future. I would say that, I speak for myself, but I think we all agree on this. This has not been easy. This is not an easy road to go down. It hasn't been, we've had some moments of fun, lightness and laughter because we're friends, but mostly this has been really hard, but also really worth it. And I think that that's sort of the message that should be conveyed, is that anything worth changing is worth fighting for, and you do the work, because nothing easy ever, no big change ever comes easy, and so it's scary, yes. Retaliation stinks, yes. Being looked at a certain way by people is not comfortable, but oh well, it's not comfortable not being treated nicely. When we were being mistreated, that wasn't comfortable either. So at least here we can stand up and say, our back straight and hold our chins up high and feel like, what, I'm not going to be treated badly, and here's how I'm going to prove it to you. So, there is a lot, I get a lot of strength from all of you, but also just in knowing that if I was doing a story about this, I would commend the woman who spoke her mind and say, I'm so happy that I could give you the voice. Here's me giving myself that same courtesy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I completely agree. And if you don't stand up, who is going to stand up? I think that's the question we all asked ourselves. And it's just going to continue and perpetuate if you don't stand up. And nobody has really stood up on this issue in our business. And, there's been a few, but not as a group. And it just became time. And at the end of the day, this is a huge issue. It is bigger than any of us. It affects, we have heard from women all over the world. So we know there's a problem, and it's time to just call it out and let the chips fall where they may.
And you know what, ladies, this is where sisterhood comes in, because, we were talking earlier, but I don't think we would have gotten this far if we hadn't started to talk to one another and share our experiences and our feelings of being marginalized and sidelined in the office. And suddenly we kind of realized we were joined by a similar treatment, similar experiences, and that's what allowed us to come together. I don't think individually we would have gotten very far at all, but together, as the five of us, there is strength, and that's the value of sisterhood. So we can come full circle in this wonderful discussion with you, you four brilliant, beautiful ladies that I'm so proud to call my sisters. And you know what, I always end my little speeches or whenever I make any kind of presentation with that wonderful quote from Margaret Mead, because I think this gives strength to all women who feel that they need to speak up and they don't want to take it anymore. And the quote is always, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, women, can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So thank you all, and it's always an honor to share the same space with you, even if it is on a computer screen.
Right back at you, Roma.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Roma. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. In 2020, we are going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in our country. And all of you who are following in the footsteps of the incredible New York suffragists who made this happen. Women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, who showed the nation that women and girls' voices truly matter. Please accept my best wishes for a wonderful event.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. My mother stands before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America.
The Equal Rights Amendment, when ratified, will help knock down those restrictions that have locked women in to the old stereotypes of behavior and opportunity. It will help open up more options for women.
What about the youth vote? We heard so much after Parkland and the March for Our Lives movement. They were really motivated. Are they really?
So there's two ways to look at that. The glass half full version says that yes, they are turning out in larger numbers than they have in previous elections. The glass half empty side, though, says that they're still underperforming. Let me give you an idea. 18 to 24-year-olds represent 8.9% of all registered voters, yet only 4.2% of them have voted so far. 18 to 34-year-olds represent about 26% of all registered voters, but only 12% have turned out.
A July analysis from the polling firm TargetSmart looked at the change in millennial voter registration before and after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. They found that since then, youth voter registration has increased nationwide by 2.1%.
We saw the response to the tragedy in Parkland was this sort of unprecedented surge in activism where you saw these Parkland students who really began the movement and brought in students from around the country where they had the March for Our Lives. And a lot of that movement was talking about turning that into political power.
Some of the biggest jumps in youth voter registration happened in key battleground states, like Pennsylvania with a 16-point increase, Virginia with a 10-point jump, and Florida with 8%.
A feeling of humility and a feeling of honor and a feeling of being blessed.
Are all emotions Michelle Jones Galvin feels when she thinks about her family's history. Jones Galvin is a fifth-generation descendant of Harriet Tubman, and along with her mother, they co-authored the book Beyond the Underground, which chronicles Tubman's life and her most precious beliefs.
Freedom for every single human being in this country and the world. She believed that no other person should own another person, and I think we can all agree to that, and that's what her work was all about.
Women are coming together to really celebrate our empowerment, the right to vote, and map out a plan for the future.
This conference, more than any other conference I've been involved in, brings together an incredibly diverse group of people that are eager to talk to each other and eager to listen to each other.
Begins, and I was in the first graduating class.
All right!
Yeah.
So this is a photo of my great-great-grandmother. This is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Young women feel empowered today because if they look backwards, they'll find out that they're standing on the shoulders of that men and women have worked very hard to create opportunities for them.
History isn't what happened, it's who tells the story. We're moving away from the great white men, great wars, great dates history. And that requires that we repopulate history with all of the voices. Then we begin to know what we're celebrating, what we're commemorating.
It was really about thinking about your own calling, your own conscience. Women's freedom of conscience was connected to women's liberty, and women's liberty was also connected to the anti-slavery movement.
He said, when I ran away from slavery, I did it for myself. When I fought for abolition, I did it for my people. But when I was at Seneca Falls, suffrage. And so he understood the importance of the vote to elevate his people, but also to protect his people from being brutalized, dehumanized, and lynched.
He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education. We insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States. We do this day affix our signatures to this declaration. Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Hello, I'm Lynn Scher, and I'm here today to tell the story of an American Revolution, a revolution of courageous women, a story you are not likely to find in the history books. 150 years ago, women began to fight for full legal citizenship. They were fighting for the right to vote. These women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Susan B. Anthony, are my heroes. More than 150 years ago, they had the foresight to understand that without certain rights, and specifically without the right to participate fully in our democracy as voting citizens, women would never take their rightful place in the country or in the world. And in case you believe this is very old news, that their cause belongs to another century, consider this. My mother was born without the right to vote. Thanks to these women, she and I and you and all of us now enjoy that privilege, and so will our children and their children. And we are here today so that nobody forgets how we got that right. That's what this statue is all about. This is Lucretia Mott. In 1848, a 55-year-old Quaker from Philadelphia who was an outspoken leader in the fight against slavery. It was Mott who was a bridge between the anti-slavery movement and the women's rights movement. She served as a mentor to both Stanton and Anthony. Meet Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a young mother who lived in upstate New York in the mid-1800s. She organized the first women's rights convention and worked for more than 30 years writing speeches urging women to recognize their inferior status and work to change it. It is Stanton who rewrote the Declaration of Independence along feminist lines and demanded the right to vote. And this is Susan B. Anthony, co-founder of the National Woman Suffrage Association, who devoted her entire adult life to the vote. But in recognition of her life's work, the 19th Amendment, which granted women voting rights, was aptly named the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. The statue that celebrates this battle, the suffrage statue, has its own story to tell about equality for women. As fate would have it, the statue that immortalizes them also had to fight long and hard to take its place in American history. With its creator standing by, the feisty sculptor Adelaide Johnson, the statue was presented to Congress in 1921, the first statue of women by a woman dedicated to women's rights.
Adelaide Johnson, who was the sculptor of the statue, had a vision about having these three women in the United States Capitol. She felt that moving that statue and these three central women in the movement into the Capitol would symbolize the entry of women politically into the heart of the political life of our nation.
I am the grandniece of Adelaide Johnson, who was the sculptor. I was at the original dedication of the monument in 1921. I slept in a dresser drawer because I was less than a year old, but my mother felt that it was important that I attend.
As historians, we know that the statue only stayed in the rotunda a matter of days, and shortly it was spirited away under cover of darkness to the crypt of the Capitol down in the basement. And there had been a very praiseworthy inscription that the women had put on the statue. It had been stenciled in gold, and very deliberately that was removed, and the names of the women were even turned to the back so that people who stumbled upon the statue by accident would not be able to read the names of the women.
They didn't want the women's names on the statue. They didn't even call it the woman's statue, it's a portrait statue. And they called the inscription blasphemous, and they had it removed. I'd like to quote to you what they found so blasphemous. Women first denied a soul, then called mindless, now arisen, declare herself an entity to be reckoned. End quote.
Rotunda is in many ways emblematic of women's struggle for justice and equality throughout our history. For too long, women in this country had had to endure the myth of what or where a woman's place should be. According to the out-of-date stereotype, a woman's place should only be in the parlor, the kitchen, and I suppose the crypt. Since then, a lot has changed. Today, a woman's place is in the House, the Senate, and yes, in the rotunda.
It took us 72 years to get the vote and 76 years to move the women from the basement of the Capitol to the living room of the Capitol. All the great revolutionary leaders of our country are here in the rotunda. Lincoln, King, Washington. But for too long, the great revolutionary leaders of the women's movement, the women that worked so hard to empower and enfranchise half of the citizens of this country with the vote, were kept in the basement.
For years, a silent revolution stirred in Capitol Hill as women tried to have the statue of the women moved up to join the men in marble. There were several attempts over the years, but none were successful. Finally, as the 70th suffrage approached,
Opened the doors for us in Congress.
So we had high hopes for this. The bill passed, was introduced one day, was passed the next day, and then when it went over to the House side, we had no indication that there was any opposition until a member over on the House side raised an objection about the $75,000 that was required to relocate the monument in September 1995. The bill died on the floor, and following that, literally 5 minutes after it happened, someone stood up and passed a bill that required money out of the architect's budget for a statue of a man. It was literally 5 minutes apart.
There were many, many excuses as to why they couldn't move the statue. We even started our contest, our State of the Statue newsletter, and we listed them. First, they said it would cost too much money. So the women's suffrage movement went out and raised $75,000 to move the statue.
On February 15th, which was a historic date because it was originally the monument dedicated on February 15th, 1921, which is Susan B. Anthony's birthday, we launched our grassroots campaign with Senator John Warner, who at this point had taken over the rules.
When my mother read an article to me about the statue and where it was, I raised $2,000 by myself. I wrote letters just saying what I was doing and that I needed help bringing the statue out of the basement.
The mail just came flooding in with the money. It was very inspirational to me and gave me the courage to keep going when things got rough, because as soon as we would get one obstacle out of the way, then another one would pop up.
We had some opposition from some minority groups who believed that Sojourner Truth should be represented in the statue. And we've worked through all these things, but it really was a struggle every step of the way.
Then they said it was too heavy. After an engineering it had before and they can today. One of my favorites was, it's too ugly. Seriously. Well, have you taken a look at Lincoln recently? Believe me, Lincoln is not in the rotunda because of his looks, and neither are these women. They
To appreciate fully this piece of American history, let's consider what life was like for an American woman born in the early 1800s. She could not own property, could not earn a living wage, and could not attend college. There were none for women. Any rights she did have were taken away by law once she entered marriage.
It was based on an Anglo-American principle called coverture, which was that when a woman married, she ceased to exist before the law. And this meant that women couldn't contract. They couldn't contract for property, but they couldn't contract for their wages. Once a woman was married, she had no legal right to claim the wages that she for her children in cases of divorce.
What these women, along with ideas that challenged the social
Stanton was married at that point and lived in Seneca Falls, which is up nearby where some of Lucretia Mott's relations had, so she used to come up there and visit. And they were all sitting around the tea table over in Waterloo talking about how they were cooped up and were dissatisfied with this and that, and they decided right on the spot they were going to have a. And they didn't have the key to the place. They had to boost one of the boys in to open up the chapel.
Adding a declaration.
Seneca Falls Declaration also addresses other things. It addresses women being kept out of higher institutions and out of the professions. And this speaks to people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, middle-class people who were eager to be, in the language of the Seneca Falls Declaration, teachers of theology and medicine and law, unable to be ministers in churches.
The response to the convention at Seneca Falls, New York, that summer day in 1848, was so great, not everyone could fit into the Wesleyan chapel. Some 3 men. At the meeting, Lucretia Mott led the debate. Resolutions passed unanimously except for number 9, the one demanding women's suffrage, the right to vote. Only after Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave and fiery orator, and Stanton argued that it was the right by which all others can be secured, was this most revolutionary resolution passed. Douglass was the only man who signed the demand for the vote. The final declaration was signed by 68 women and 32 men. 3 years later, Susan B. Anthony joined forces with Stanton and Mott, taking to the lecture circuit to promote the cause. Stanton, who had 7 children to raise, stayed home and at first wrote the speeches that Anthony would deliver. As Stanton put it, I loaded the gun and Susan fired it.
She'd come to Elizabeth Cady Stanton and say, you've got to write a speech for me for next week at such and such a convention. And I'll take care of the kids and I'll stir up the cake, but you've got to sit down and write.
At the same time that Stanton, Anthony, and Mott were fighting for women's right to vote, Sojourner Truth, a very powerful black woman orator, was very active in that period and traveled throughout the country speaking on behalf of women's rights. Later in the 19th century and then early in the 20th century, there were a number of black women who were active in supporting women's right to vote, such as Helen Burroughs. They often wrote in black magazines and spoke to black women's groups about empowering black women through the vote.
The writing and the speaking would take several generations, years of conventions, petitions, meetings, lectures. In the process, the Civil War tore the country apart. After fighting for the end of slavery, these women expected equality for not just black men, but for all black and white women too.
What we might call